Hey, what's up, guys? Hello from Footballtalk here. Back by popular demand, we are recapping week 2 of the NFL by going through every single game and sharing my thoughts on them after I was finally able to work through all of them. Before we get into it, however, since I don't want to bring it up in the middle of this, seeing all those injuries pop up was devastating. I hope everybody has a smooth way back and balls out next year because I literally feel sick for those guys. Obviously, the shortened off-season program and the limited live reps are showing up now, which I hope won't continue to be a trend. As somebody who has torn his ACL twice, I know what the recovery looks like, and I really feel for all these guys. But let's not allow this to take away from a great week of football that we had, and I'll now recap this whole thing. Once again, I will go game by game from Thursday night chronologically on, all the way to Monday night. Before we do that, however, I want to pat myself on the back a little bit here. Went 14-2 on my picks for week 2, and if you're interested to see my picks every week, you can go and check out my Instagram or my Twitter, where I will always have them a couple hours before the games start on Sunday. And now let's start with the Battle of Ohio, with two former number 1 overall picks at quarterback battling it out, with the Cincinnati Bengals traveling to Cleveland. And the main takeaway here, Joe Burrow, what a game he really played, certainly were outmatched. 61 pass attempts for Burrow when he was under fire pretty much all game, and still came through continuously, went 5 for 5 on 4th down, really making some special plays, but also just easy, how much he's in command, the feel he has for what's going on around him, whether it's accelerating that internal clock, feeling pressure and finding the right option among the 5 guys out in the pattern for the most part. Force fed AJ Green a little bit, trying to make that chemistry work, took a shot down the sideline right away, but targeting Green 13 times, only 3 of them caught for 29 yards. Had a nice battle with Denzel Ward though, who had an excellent game himself. The offensive line to me is still a major issue across the board pretty much for Cincinnati. Sheldon Richardson routinely got in there on the action, even though it didn't show up on the stat sheet, like forcing Mixon to bounce out wide on the 1st and goal from the 1, which ended up forcing a field goal. Myles Garrett, he put some licks on Burrow before forcing that fumble inside the Bengals 5. But Burrow really continued to battle. Beautiful throw to his rookie receiver T. Higgins at the sideline as he was rolling to his right and just fired a laser. Had another nice throw on a fade route from the tight end CJ Osoma, who got hurt actually, but then Drew Sample, he got targeted time and time again. And for both of these teams, I can really say they struggle to cover backs and tight ends in the pass game. And when I look on the other side of the ball, I think the Browns offense, they really got back to where they belong with heavy personnel, letting things run through their backs, and for Baker finally getting that connection with OBJ going a little bit, which simply had not been working ever since he came over from New York. I feel like last year they really force-fed him as well. Simply not on the same page on a lot of times. But I hit that double move for a big touchdown early on. Chubb and Hunt, they really had their way in the ground game. And that duel will be a problem with how physical they run the ball. But the one glimmer of hope for the Bengals' run defense for me is how DJ Reader can improve it. The Bengals at one point had a big goal line stop when the ball was spotted inside the 1-yard line. And Reader showed up in the backfield on a couple of those plays to slow down Chubb. But overall the Browns' offense, very consistent. Sustained long drives with a nice mix of plays called by Ken Stefanski, who used those different personnel packages, and is really starting to use those skill position players in the appropriate manner. But both teams in goal-to-goal situations really started to convert. And as far as the kicking game goes, Randy Bullock, the Bengals kicker, he looked fine to me after showing signs of cramps following that missed field goal that would have tied the game against the Chargers in week 1, and then showing up on the injury report with calves, as in plural. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But overall, Burrow highly impressive. I like what the Browns doing offensively. But please, Bengals, get this guy an offensive line. And that brings us to a second divisional game, with the Jacksonville Jaguars going to Tennessee to face the Titans. And Gardner Minshew had another impressive showing. His very first throw actually should have been intercepted as he put the ball up for grabs towards the sideline on a deep over route. But this guy's just such a gamer. On the first possession, converted 2 straight 3rd and 7s, and then in that 4th and 3, on the brink of field goal range, he somehow escaped that rush to the left, scampered ahead for a new 1st down. A couple of plays later, his tight end tipped the ball up for grabs for the first interception of the game. And he almost had another one when Jaron Brown undercut an option route from the back. But overall, Minshew was the biggest reason Jacksonville stayed in that game once again. And that game-tying lob pass to Chris Thompson on the wheel route, that was a thing of beauty. It was also good to see DJ Chark make some plays, hauling in all 4 of his targets for 84 yards. But I don't really get why they don't give him more opportunities, since he and Minshew had a great connection right off the bat last season. As far as the Jags backfield goes, undrafted rookie James Robinson, he continues to impress. actually outproducing what was a Jags kill in Derrick Henry by 36 yards on 6 less touches. He now has 210 yards from scrimmage and averages 5.1 yards per rush. That makes me feel pretty good about putting him as my number 9 back in the draft after nobody talked about him in the pre-draft process. And I also feel pretty good on where I put Laviska Shenault, who makes plays whenever they give him the chance to, manufactures quite a few touches for him. The Titans' defense was rather disappointing to me in the second half especially, allowing 20 points and just being off with the run fits, as he failed to fill from the backside a few times or just fell asleep on the draw play. And what actually cost the Jags the game was leaving Jadeveon Clowney, of all people, completely unblocked on a 3rd and long when the game was tied at 30, before Jeffrey Simmons tipped the ball up for the game-sealing Harold Landry interception coming off Tennessee's field goal to give them the lead. If not for that, I would bet that this game would have gone to overtime. And for the Titans offense, Ryan Tannehill, such an efficient outing once again, completing 18 of 24 passes for 239 yards and 4 touchdowns with no picks. Since he took over as the starter last year, he has thrown 28 touchdowns compared to only 5 picks, and his team has gone 11-5 over that stretch, including the playoffs. He's an elite play-action passer who can fire the deep ball or make good decisions of bootlegs, including taking the free yardage if there's a lot of green grass in front of him. Jonnu Smith, he's really becoming a monster due to his ability to win at the catch point and run away from people when he has the ball in his hands. And he's really not one of those guys who you have to give the ball a whole lot to, whether it's slipping out into the flats, off play action, or sneaking past guys to the original play side when they're running bootlegs. He can quickly burn the opposition. Of his 5 targets, he caught all but one of them for 84 yards and 2 touchdowns, with the low completion resulting in a big gain thanks to pass interference being called. Corey Davis, he's finally starting to show what made him a top 10 pick back in the day. That slant shot he had on the goal line where he won for a touchdown, that was really beautiful, with the DB having inside position and him just giving that little head fake to the outside to open up that inside path again. And for the Jaguars defense, rookie Kayvon Chase, son from LSU, he got his first sack as a pro, but that was Jacksonville only one of the game, and overall they only got 4 total hits on Tannehill, but they did finally stand up to the bully in Derrick Henry, who averaged just 3.4 yards per carry. And I want to shout out rookie corner CJ Henderson once again, who already had a tremendous debut last week, and then on Sunday had a nice one-on-one tackle on King Henry, after he was made fun of by some people because of his tackling in the pre-draft process. One more thing for the Titans offense, the depth at the running back position is somewhat questionable for me, even though I like rookie Darrington Evans, because when do you still see a back take 55 of 60 handoffs, if you exclude the quarterback of course, when you go for the first 2 weeks of the season? That's very uncommon in today's game. The Jaguars tried a surprise onside kick to start the second half, which I actually didn't mind, even though I didn't think they had a great look for it. But what won the Titans the game was Stephen Gostkowski. He still missed the PAT actually, but he hit a 51-yard field goal. And after a horrible week 1, he hits the game winner from 49 yards out. That has to be a relief from what maybe is a Hall of Fame kicker. Now let's move on to the Panthers at the Buccaneers. I thought after a disappointing week 1 for Tom Brady in this Bucs offense, where he turned the ball over 3 times, including a pick 6 for Brady, they really showed me some promise, even though it was maybe against the worst defense in all of football. But there are also still some areas of concern. With Chris Godwin on the concussion protocol, Brady and Mike Evans really got things heated up, with all but one of his 7 grabs resulting in a first down or touchdown and reaching the century mark. Even though there was another miscommunication between the two, as Brady accepted Mike to curl up, well, he decided to break outside, and that led to a Dante Jackson interception early in the second half to set up his own offense in opposing territory. On the other hand, there has been no connection between Brady and Gronk to speak of. Brady underthrew Justin Watson a flea flick in the second quarter, which should have resulted in a touchdown, and also had a couple of drops in the end zone. Scotty Miller dropped one for an early touchdown, before Ronald Jones cashed that one in, and then LaShawn McCoy a wheel route late in the fourth quarter. And speaking of Rojo, after an impressive week 1 showing, their designated RB1 entered the doghouse following his fumble early in the second quarter, but it felt like they were trying to work Leonard Fournette more into the lineup all along, because while that 46-yard touchdown to seal the win did make up for a lot of his total, Lenny ran the ball 12 times for 103 yards and 2 scores, which that late one was a huge play as well. To me, it feels a little too much like Brady wants to run the Patriots offense with dump-offs to his backs, while the offense is actually designed to push the ball down the field. The Panthers defense, they could not put any pressure on Brady. 0 sacks, I think only 4 quarterback hits altogether, with Brian Burns being the only one to flash off the edge on a few occasions. And on the other side of the ball, the Panthers offense, they seemed overwhelmed by that swarming Bucs defense. That's what it felt like to me. Sue, JPP, and all those guys, they were all over Teddy Bridgewater for most of the day, putting up 5 sacks and adding another 7 hits on the quarterback. And while McCaffrey did score 2 touchdowns, that Bucs run defense, they really kept him balled up for most of the day. 88 total yards and 22 touches, whether it was in the run game or catching the ball underneath. That speed, especially from those linebackers and Devin White and Lavonte David, it really jumps off the screen, and they recorded 9.5 tackles for loss. Bridgewater was picked off twice and stripped once, leading to 17 combined points right off those, while Robbie Anderson had a fumble that could have been very costly as well to start the second half. And I have to say, on that first interception by Teddy B, I don't think I've ever seen somebody throw a screen as badly as Bridgewater's, where he just airmailed the ball over McCaffrey's head without anybody in his face. Robbie Anderson has actually played really well outside of that one fumble, catching 15 of 18 targets for 223 yards and a touchdown so far, which puts him 4th in the league in yards through the air, ahead of guys like Devontae Adams and DeAndre Hopkins. The Panthers were only one of many teams to run a punt fake this past week, when they were already close to field goal range, and I had no problem with the call. It was just bad execution. One of those guys up front got through unblocked and blew up Jeremy Chin. The Bucs jumped out early on and went into halftime with a convincing 21-0 lead until Fournette finally closed out the game, so it's still a little bit of a work in progress for me. And that brings us to a first game where injuries really put a damper on what happened the rest of the way, with the Denver Broncos losing to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they lost much more than just the game. Their young star receiver Cortland Sutton, he'll be out for the year with a torn ACL, after they had surrounded him with some other dynamic pass catchers, and he already had 3 grabs for 66 yards in this one. And I'm not sure about the status of Drew Lock's shoulder, since he has a time frame of 2 to 6 weeks to get back, which is a big difference between those two numbers. But even when he comes back, that offense will have to ask 2 rookies to win routinely for them as far as the receiver position goes. The 2 bright spots for Denver, I thought, Melvin Gordon, he really burned this Pittsburgh's defense on a few occasions. Some excellent cutbacks and tough running, spinning off defenders and driving through contact. And then had that big over-the-shoulder catch on another wheel route for a 4th quarter touchdown. And then Noah Fant, he's emerging as a big play threat from the tight end position. Caught 2 corner routes, with one going for a touchdown and another one to keep that final drive going, where he just pulled it into his body before the sideline. Broncos rookie cornerback Michael Ojemudia, he should finally have his first career interception, had 1 called back last week, and in this one just dropped an underthrown go ball by Big Ben. On the very next play, Juju Smith-Schuster, big conversion on the 3rd and 10, where he caught a tunnel screen and somehow got past the marker, and then James Conner finished off that drive. What has really stood out to me these first 2 weeks, Pittsburgh's group of receivers is much more impressive than people wanted to give it credit for. I always liked them, inside Deontay Johnson would be a breakout candidate, but now Juju, he's making some timely plays. Johnson, he had his best game as a pro yet, 8 catches for 92 yards and 1 touchdown, plus another really fun punt return where he ran around like a madman. And then Chase Claypool, he goes off for an 84-yard touchdown, looking like Megatron back in the day. That can be scary. The Steelers seemed in firm control of this game, up 17-3 at halftime, and combined with all those injuries for Denver, but somehow they let Jeff Driscoll and those banged up Broncos back in the second half with a chance to win it late. And it all came down to a 4th and 2 from the Pittsburgh 15, where the defense once again closed the game as Terrell Edmonds came up with a big sack. But on that play, the backup quarterback should have thrown hard to Melvin Gordon on an angle route, who was wide open for a new first down. Even though outside of that, Driscoll actually had a pretty solid game considering who he was facing. But we all know that he's not the type of guy who will win you games necessarily. So the Broncos season, it kind of hangs in the balance now, with the Steelers actually looking more dangerous by the week if Big Ben really continues to get back to his usual self and builds chemistry with all those pass catches. Their defensive line was overwhelming once again. And that takes us to one of the bigger early window games, with the Rams going to Philadelphia and convincingly beating the Eagles. And I have to admit it, I was wrong on this Rams team. I projected them to finish the season sub 500, and it was mostly due to holes that I saw on that roster. I actually had them as my pick in this particular game, which I already changed to what I predicted preseason, because of how bad that makeshift offensive line looked like on the interior for the Eagles, and Aaron Donald having the ability to destroy it from the inside. That whole team is more physical than I give it credit for. Looks like a full-on running back committee there, but all those guys run hard. You see some big hits on defense. One of my draft sleepers, Jordan Fuller, he showed up big. And another guy who I like better than most of the experts was Micah Kaiser. Might not be the most athletically gifted linebacker, but he has a nose for the ball and securely brings down the guy who carries it. Tyler Higbee, to me, he's really turning into an excellent all-around tight end, making some big blocks on the second level to spring his backs loose, and obviously had those 3 touchdowns. I just love how Sean McVay continues to add little wrinkles to his offense without getting away from what they do best, with the zone run game and the things off that with play action throwback screens, while mixing up his personnel a little more now. And what I really love about that Rams attack is how much motion they use at the snap. In week 1, they actually led the league with 34% of plays where they had motion at the snap, and that creates some conflicts for the opposing team's defense. As far as the Eagles go, I don't want to sound like a Carson Wentz apologist, and I will get to him in a second, but those Philly receivers, they have to play better as well. Deshaun Jackson, he had a couple of drops, still on a ton of separation for all these guys, and on that first interception for Wentz, I have to say JJ Arcega-Whiteside, he had a step on his man, but he has to keep that guy on his hip and not allow him to undercut that route. Should have been a touchdown, actually put the Eagles up by 2 or 3 points depending on if they go for the 2-point conversion, when the game was still 21-16. Miles Sanders, who didn't even travel with his team in week 1, he looked very dynamic both ways in the pass and run game, and like I mentioned in my breakout segment this offseason, I expect big things out of him. But Wentz didn't play a clean game once again, and despite being down by double digits for most of the second half, he had only 1 completion of 20 plus air yards. He's not 33rd in the league in terms of passer rating when there's only 32 teams. And the thing that I saw when I watched the tape, he's not really rotating through enough. His base continues to go wider, and maybe it's that groin injury. I don't know quite what it is, but that doesn't look right to me. And I'm just not sure how much more injuries they can sustain on the offensive line. If Isaac Seumalo is now out for a longer period of time as well, they will have 2 guards in there starting who might not have even made the roster if everybody was healthy in the first place. Defensively, the Eagles looked gassed at some point, and they could not make the plays necessary to win games. Allowed almost 200 yards rushing, 30 first downs on the day, while the Rams converted 7 of 12 third down attempts and got into the end zone in all but 1 of the 5 red zone trips. Overall, I have to say the Rams are certainly better than I expect them to be, with more energy and playmaking ability, while the Eagles, they are obviously off to a bad start, and if those injuries continue to pile up, I just don't see how they can compete in a loaded NFC conference. Let's get to a first true blowout of the week, with the 49ers going to New York. And I just think back to this meme I saw for the 49ers. They easily won the game, but at what cost? The big story coming out of this one, all the injuries the Niners have suffered. At some point, their starting quarterback, running back, one of the receivers, their top 2 centers, and 2 defensive linemen were all out of the game to go along with George Kittle and Richard Sherman already being out. And what might be even worse, despite all those injuries, the 49ers still blew out the Jets. I had these Jets as my 32nd team in my preseason power rankings, and I feel pretty good about that one now, since they are the only squad that really hasn't shown me anything so far. And I don't think any play exemplifies that more than on 3rd and 31 at some point, Jerick McKinnon breaking loose for a 55-yard run. So I don't even want to talk too much about this game. What is happening with the 49ers injury-wise obviously sucks a lot. And it's even worse that they have to play at MetLife Stadium next Sunday again, when players are already openly criticizing the slippery turf there. Nick Bosa more than anybody, that's an enormous blow to lose him, and that immediately moves them down a notch in my personal rankings. But as long as Kittle and the rest of those guys come back healthy, this is still a very tough team to beat. Their depth will be tested, however. The Jets, on the other hand, they are just a dumpster fire. I feel bad for Sam Darnold, who never really had a chance. Adam Gase, he drives me crazy for not letting dynamic pass catchers like Chris Herndon loose, but rather turning me into a blocker first, especially with the lack of weapons in the pass game outside of him, as well as giving 37-year-old Frank Gore 21 carries when he's averaging 3 yards a clip. The only positive sign here was Quinnen Williams on one snap destroying the interior of their 49ers offensive line for one of his 2 sacks on the day in the second half. Clearly his best game as a pro so far, but that play was directly followed by that ridiculous 3rd and 31 conversion. And I have to say, that final touchdown pass from Darnold, that was pretty sick as well. When he was scrambling to his left, flick of the wrist, fired across his body for that touchdown. I believe it's time to fire Gase, and if they don't show anything over his next couple of weeks, maybe go to full-time tank mode. Another divisional game from Sunday, the Buffalo Bills going to Miami and beating the Dolphins in a close one. When you look at Josh Allen, I've been so impressed with what he's done these first 2 weeks. Before getting into his passing, he looks so much like Cam Newton as a runner. He had that one scramble where he just ran over 2 Dolphins defenders and plowed ahead for close to a first down. Actually fumbled the ball on that one, they retained possession, but just watching that physical dominance as a runner to go along with his passing, that is scary. That Stephon Diggs connection is really starting to heat up. His 153 receiving yards on 8 grabs were 40 more than all Vikings receivers combined for against the Colts on Sunday. That's actually the game I will get to right after this. John Brown, he looks a lot more comfortable as the number 2 receiver as well. And Allen overall making those big time downfield throws. He's really improved his deep ball with more weapons in the passing game. Through the first 2 weeks, he's 11 of 12 on passes of 20 plus air yards. And I really like the touch he has added to connect on some deep crossing routes and all that kind of stuff, where he just wants to give his man an opportunity to separate late, instead of always throwing the ball 100 miles an hour. Last week I was actually made fun of again on Reddit for saying he will be an MVP candidate, and I know it was only the Jets and Dolphins, but Miami's secondary is actually pretty impressive, and Allen is putting up big numbers for what I believe will be a double-digit win team. So far he's completing 70% of his passes for 729 yards, and he's been responsible for 7 touchdowns. The only 3 quarterbacks to hit those kind of bookmarks to start off a season: Peyton, Brady, and Mahomes. All one-name guys. The Bills have also spread touches pretty equally between Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, and those guys really complement each other well, with Singletary being more a threat to the edges, while Moss is that banger inside. Defensively, the Bills made one huge goal line stand against the Dolphins with about 2 minutes left in the third quarter, and I actually thought they were much more aggressive with their blitz packages in the second half of that game. Let's hope that 2 starting linebackers in nickel packages are back this week, because they had a problem defending inside breaking routes, especially Levi Wallace. He had a rough day. And as far as the Dolphins go, Ryan Fitzpatrick, he really made some big throws down the field, stepping up into the pocket and keeping his eyes locked on what he has there. And Mike Gesicki, he's becoming one of the best receiving tight ends in the league. Caught 8 passes for 130 yards and a touchdown late, which outside of Isaiah Ford's surprising 76 yards, was more than the rest of the team combined for. He made so many great grabs with the defender right on him, including that stupid one-hander where the ball was thrown slightly behind him. When you look at this Dolphins backfield, similar to what I talked about with the Patriots last week, they are so frustrating for fantasy purposes, as 3 guys once again had between 5 and 7 carries on the day. Myles Gaskin actually the most involved in the pass game, but still, I'm not sure if you can trust any of them. That's a full-on committee. And on defense, the Dolphins pass rush could not make Josh Allen uncomfortable at any moment of the game, it felt like, and they will have to create some pressure with creative play calling and blitz packages, because their corners, even if Byron Jones is back healthy next week, they cannot stay attached with those deep crosses and post routes all the time if their opposing quarterback has like 4+ seconds to just stand there in the pocket. And that allowed Josh Allen's first 400-yard passing performance. So that whole defense was rather disappointing to me. And one more thing I want to point out here, Micah Hyde, he might be the best onside kick recovery specialist in the entire league. I feel like he comes up with the ball off that hop every single time he gets a chance. And last year he even returned one of those for a touchdown. So just a little detail for you, he's already a very versatile piece on defense, but he adds that to the mix as well. And like I mentioned, now we're going to talk about the Colts hosting the Minnesota Vikings. We have to start things with a less inspiring quarterback performance, as Kirk Cousins probably played his worst game as a pro, going 11 of 26 for just 113 yards and 3 interceptions with no touchdowns. The Vikings actually drove right down the field all the way to Indy's 3-yard line with a big Adam Thielen sideline grab and some nice Dalvin Cook runs. But then they never got back there until he finally scored a rather meaningless touchdown with just about 5 minutes left on the clock. Cousins also took a stupid safety in the end zone where he could have just thrown the ball to his back in the flat zone, do whatever, but he just pulled it down and allowed the defense to wrap him up. Later on, he forced the deep ball to Thielen, who was bracketed and never had a real chance to make play in the air, leading to Cousins' first interception of the game. And his only completion of 20+ yards came just before the half with Justin Jefferson, when the defense was playing way off and tackled the rookie in bounds. To show you how little Minnesota even trusted their own quarterback, they were running down the clock by handing the ball off down 15 points in the third quarter. At the same time, I'll have to say, there's not a lot of creativity from this offense, especially in the passing game. For the Colts defense, the maniac Darius Leonard, he was all over the field, making key tackles in the open field and breaking up the pass on an out route to the back. And on one snap, he was actually in a stack alignment over the backside guard and shot through all the way on the play side B-gap on his own run to tackle Alexander Madison for a loss on the play. DeForest Buckner, he's starting to put a stamp on his defense, including that sack that led to the safety. And on the other side of the ball, I already called for the Jonathan Taylor show last week, and he immediately went for 100 yards and a touchdown on the ground, displaying that burst, power, and leg drive to give that Colts offense an identity, in combination with what I believe is an elite offensive line. He has surprisingly caught the ball pretty well as well, and you also saw some shiftiness for him. Naheem Hines, who touched the ball 15 times the week prior, he was a non-factor in this game with 1 catch for 4 yards, and so was Paris Campbell surprisingly, who looked to be one of Philip Rivers' favorite targets soon. He's now out for a couple of weeks probably. However, the one guy who really showed up for him in the past game, Mo Ali Cox, he just exploded in the absence of starting tight end Jack Doyle with 5 catches for 111 yards. 3 of those came on corner routes, once going up over 2 defenders in spectacular fashion, had a screen drawn up for him as well. And early on, I was positively surprised to see that Phillip Rivers can still put some spin on the ball, throwing a perfect strike to T.Y. Hilton that should have led to a touchdown, but the veteran just balled and dropped it. But Rivers also showed that he simply cannot drive the ball towards the sideline anymore at this stage of his career, which kind of limits what this offense can do. But the Colts are making the 30-year-old part of that system rather than relying on him to carry the team to new heights. And when they asked him to make some big throws on a couple of occasions, he did not shy away from standing in there and letting the ball go to a spot before his receiver could even get out of his breaks. For Minnesota, Yannick Ngakoue did get his first strip sack as a Viking, where he got a jump off the snap and the left tackle was kind of off. But other than that, that defense didn't make any potential game-changing plays. And like I said last week, I'm very concerned, especially with the secondary, Anthony Barr out for the year now as well. I want to point out the Colts kicker here, undrafted rookie Rodrigo Blankenship, went 4 for 4 on 4th downs, made both his PATs, and the Colts had another big play on special teams where they downed the punt at the Minnesota 1-yard line. In retrospect, I think the Colts slept on the Jaguars a little bit and lost that game as a combination of missed opportunities and given chances to turn things around. We saw them bring it all together again against the Vikings, where they controlled the game pretty much the entire way, which is much more like what I expected from them all along. The Vikings, on the other hand, they have been one of the most disappointing squads in the whole league, whether it was the offense only picking up empty calories when they were already down by several points in both their games so far, or the defense just not being able to stop anybody. And speaking of the Vikings, let's talk about 2 other NFC North teams battling it out, or rather the Lions once again losing badly to the Packers. Detroit was actually out to an early lead, 14-3 after the first quarter, and even going into halftime down 17-14, they were well in the game. But on the very next play from scrimmage, Aaron Jones goes 75 yards to the house. Matt Stafford, he had a couple of nice connections with Marvin Jones. Kerryon Johnson looked like a top back once again, and they moved the ball for the most part, but in the second half, not so much, as they went 3 and out on the first possession, and then Stafford threw a pick 6 on the very next possession. In the fourth quarter, that Packers pass rush really took over, especially Rashawn Gary, who I already mentioned could break out in year 2, really showed out, 1.5 sacks and several other pressures, including actually forcing that pick 6 and making Stafford step up into the arms of a teammate. For Green Bay's offense, after exploding for 4 touchdowns in week 1, Aaron Rodgers had more of an efficient outing, 18 of 30 for 240 yards and 2 touchdowns. But the other Aaron actually had a huge day, as Aaron Jones went for 236 yards and 3 touchdowns from scrimmage on just 22 touches, resulting in 45 fantasy points, which I know way too well since he played against me in one of my leagues, and I still somehow found a way to overcome it. He also had an unreal over-the-shoulder grab on a straight go route when he was lined up out wide. And as far as the second running back position goes, I think Jamal Williams showed why he should bet at RB2 due to his ability to protect the passer, and he also picked up a few big conversions. The whole Packers offense seems revitalized almost, while the Lions defense, they were completely flat in the second half. Other than Jamie Collins showing up in the backfield a few times, they did not show much resistance whatsoever, and they have now allowed 73 points over the last 5 quarters. To top it all off, Detroit's defense allowed a 3rd and 11 conversion right after the 2-minute warning when the Packers were out with the backups and really didn't need that one. It just didn't seem like there was any will to still do something. But for the Packers, all of a sudden with the rest of the NFC North, outside of Chicago, who have yet to face a team with a win actually, and San Francisco sustaining a multitude of key injuries, after they had handed them 2 of the 4 total losses last season, the Packers are now in the running for one of the conference's top seeds potentially, because when you have those 2 Aarons with Rodgers and Jones, one goes off 1 week and then takes a little bit of a step down while the other emerges, that is a scary sight for the entire league. The Lions, on the other hand, they are at danger of collapsing, and Matt Patricia could be on the hot seat rather soon if those players have already given up on him. Let's get to the game with the craziest finish of the week, and one of the crazier finishes I've seen in NFL history. The Falcons somehow losing that game. I'm sorry, but they will be forever chokers. From 28-3 in the Super Bowl 4 years ago to 20-0 at AT&T Stadium in 2020. Either this team is cursed, or Dan Quinn just doesn't have this team ready to finish games the right way. Atlanta was balling early on, with the defense punching at the ball and running people down. Over the first 5 drives of the game for Dallas, they forced a punt, 3 fumbles, and stopped a 4th down punt fake, while the offense, they cashed in on those opportunities they were giving, scoring on all 6 possessions to end the half after starting with a couple of punts, which led to 29 points over the first 30 minutes. They scored another 10 points in 3 drives of 30 total plays, but Julio Jones, he had a perfect deep ball from fellow wide receiver Russell Gage slip right through his hands, which should have been the dagger touchdown. When Atlanta first got the ball in the second half, you rarely see him drop one of those. Julio's running mate Calvin Ridley, he's actually been the best receiver on this team and probably in all of football so far, hauling in 16 catches for 239 yards and 4 touchdowns combined over the first 2 games. The Falcons unfortunately only averaged 3.3 yards per rush, and that missing element kept him from being able to close this thing out. Todd Gurley does not look like a former offensive player of the year. And for the Cowboys, those turnovers early on really put them in a hole, as they did force 2 3 and outs to start the game, but then Ridley ran a great route for the first touchdown, and then the Falcons had a clever play design where they had new tight end Hayden Hurst wide open when they were running a zone play to the left and then booted the other way, and Hurst was wide open slipping through on the original play side. And while I wouldn't say he had a great game, I admire the rookie Trevon Diggs for battling against Julio for most of that game, with the coaches actually having the confidence in him to let him follow one of the greats in the game and a fellow Alabama alum throughout the game, even if he moved into the slot. The Dallas offense did start off sluggish, but their playmakers really started showing up as the game went along, working against what I said last week is still a horrible secondary for the Falcons. Dak Prescott, he had a week 2 high 450 passing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns on just 5 attempts. Rookie CeeDee Lamb came up big down the stretch, setting up a touchdown to pull within 2, and then that game-winning field goal. Amari Cooper, he was right at 100 yards. And Michael Gallup, even though he had 2 catches on the day, he had that huge sideline grab the drive before that, where he got 1 foot and 1 butt cheek down. You pair that up with what looks like a pissed off Zeke, who looks so much more dynamic than he did a year ago, and is now running through people as if they talk bad about his mama. That offense will be a nightmare to stop. On the Cowboys' first touchdown, I think Zeke actually took the soul of Demonte KZ with a truck for the ages. Special teams obviously a huge story in this one. That onside kick was like nothing I'd ever seen, as the ball just continued to swirl along and none of the Falcons players knew if and when they should pounce on it. I watched Game Day Final from NFL Network later on, and Chris Rose said in that one, it almost looked like a game of curling, only that the brooms were missing in this one. I personally think when you see that ball travel 8 or 9 yards and it looks like it's gonna go there, you need to jump on it. After that, Greg the Leg Zuerlein, he obviously came through with the game-winning field goal, but for Mike McCarthy, those decisions to fake 2 punts in your own territory and to go for 2 when you're down 9, those were all highly questionable to me and only aren't talked about now because they somehow won that game. But this was a crazy one to watch. 79 total points and a comeback for the ages, and it might determine the seasons of these 2 teams. The one crazy statistic coming out of this, if you haven't heard it yet, up until Sunday, teams that had scored 39 points and hadn't turned the ball over were 440-0. So the Falcons made some history with this epic collapse. And that takes us to a final early window game, much less high scoring, with the Giants going to Chicago. And for the Giants offense, once again, Daniel Jones did not have a great statistical line against the Bears, but I thought he did a good job battling it out and almost pulled off the W. He was under fire all game long once again, and that Bears pass rush with Khalil Mack, Robert Quinn, and Akeem Hicks, it could be deadly for Chicago's future opponents. But I mean, New York's offensive line at some point did not even put a hand on Khalil Mack for God's sake. There were a few drops, and that Jones' lone interception was due to Evan Ingram actually slipping on a hook route, who's been pretty much a disappointment so far this season after the big 3rd and 10 conversion in the final drive of the game. But Jones had some big scrambles, got the ball to Dion Lewis whilst he was getting tackled, which led to another 3rd down conversion. And that Saquon Barkley injury obviously is devastating. Selfishly, it's even worse since I just bought low on him in my main fantasy league after that game against the Steelers. But I'm just such a big fan of this kid and I feel sick about this whole situation. The Giants will have to switch to more of a committee approach here with Wayne Gallman, Dion Lewis, and Devontae Freeman. That will be a mess once again for anybody to figure out fantasy-wise. And for the Bears offense, early on it looked like they would use newly paid Tariq Cohen quite a bit, but then David Montgomery really started taking over, led his team in rushing and receiving yards with 82 and 45 respectively, including the first touchdown of the game. And I continue to be impressed with this offensive line executing the zone run game, and Monty battling through some injuries that he's clearly dealing with. Cordell Patterson, pound for pound, he might be the hardest running guy in the entire league, on a few kick returns as a straight-up running back. Once completely trucked somebody on the return. But the one guy for Big Blue that I really want to point out here, James Bradbury, he played one heck of a game. He made life tough on Allen Robinson all game long, who caught just 3 of his 9 targets for 33 yards. And the Giants' new corner knocked one ball up for an interception, and then later on ripped the ball out of A-Rob's hands for a pick himself in the fourth quarter to give his team a chance to win this game. One of my draft sleepers, Darnell Mooney from Tulane, he's made an impact early on for Chicago, 3 catches in each of his first 2 contests, including his first career touchdown on Sunday, where Mitch Trubisky made a big throw all the way across the field to the corner of the end zone. But overall, Mitch I felt played a so-so game, and to me the offense will have to run through the backs and winning by play design with Matt Nagy if this team wants to be a serious contender, to go with complementary play from the quarterback position. The Bears were also really lucky on the 4th and 1 play with a couple of minutes left in the game on the brink of field goal range as the ball was knocked out of Jimmy Graham's hands and right into the ones of offensive lineman Bobby Massey. Overall, I have to say, I think the Bears could easily be the number 2 team in the NFC North and compete for a wildcard berth potentially, especially with how disappointing the Lions and Vikings have been so far, while the Giants, now with Saquon out for the year, should once again be picking in the top 5 of the 2021 draft. Let's move on to a 4 p.m. game with the Washington football team traveling to Arizona to take on the Cardinals, and this was never a really close game. For Washington offense, I thought Dwayne Haskins really struggled for the first 3 quarters, until in the fourth he finally started forcing the ball to his top receiver Terry McLaurin, and once he did that, great things happened for them. On the first drive in the fourth quarter, McLaurin caught all 3 of his targets for 60 yards and Washington's first touchdown of the game. I think Haskins' pocket presence and ball security really aren't very good, and I still want to see his process speed up in terms of deciphering defenses and finding the right option. If the injury to guard Brandon Scherf is serious, that would be horrible for this team, since I believe he's the best player on either side of the ball right now for them. And I'm just waiting for Antonio Gibson to finally bust loose for a long touchdown. J.D. McKissick, he looked pretty good, and Gibson at least got his first career touchdown on Sunday. While the people who spent their fantasy waivers on Peyton Barber last week after he had 2 goal line touchdowns clearly haven't watched him enough, create minimal production from the touches he receives, had only 1 of them on Sunday. I really like what I've seen from his Cardinals defense over the first 2 weeks, however, playing with much more urgency and pursuit overall. And on the offensive side of the ball, Kyler Murray is already a superstar in this league. His elusiveness is so frustrating for pass rushers. The way he extends plays is so close to what the Cardinals have already seen for several years now inside their own division with Russell Wilson. And when the second-year star takes off, he becomes a mixture between Russ and Lamar Jackson kind of. That second touchdown scramble in particular was a thing of magic. Murray has now become the first quarterback ever to go for over 500 yards passing and over 150 yards rushing over the first 2 weeks of the season. You saw him complete at least 2 passes to 7 different receivers on less than 40 attempts. He did throw a bad pick in the first quarter, where he kind of let it go off his back foot, but that was really his only mistake of the contest. And as great as DeAndre Hopkins was in week 1 in particular, it helps to have play calls set you up for success, like motioning you into a bunch almost, and then getting wide open on a pivot route off your teammates running defenders off. And Washington somehow also let him go for an easy touchdown on a slant route, where they played a type of goal line zone, and there seemed to be no communication whatsoever. Cliff Kingsbury also packs a few trick plays every week, with reverse pitches, fake end-arounds, and different eye candy to throw defenders off balance. But the one thing I have to say, I don't care if they converted it. Going for it on 4th down, inside your own 30, when there's really no reason to do it, that's just stupid to me. Arizona has looked great so far, with drastic improvements on both sides of the ball, it feels like, and they now have wins over what still was a healthy 49ers team, and Washington, who was pretty impressive in their own right in week 1, which really was never a close contest. While this next one, it actually went to overtime, with the Chiefs going up against the Chargers. Patrick Mahomes had a career-low 60 passing yards in the first half. He was under fire all game long with Joey Bosa, Melvin Ingram, and Jerry Tillery in his face on every other snap it felt like. But what really kept the Chiefs in the game and ultimately won it for them was Mahomes' ability to pick up crucial yards with his legs as the defense played deep coverage and he could step away from the pressure for several huge conversions, like the 3rd and 20 with less than a minute remaining in regulation, where he picked up 21 yards. On that Mecole Hardman touchdown, he actually surprised his own receiver and made almost like a tight pocket pass that you will see on a basketball court. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's starting to show his pass catching skills with 6 receptions for 32 yards, and he had another big grab down the seams, which was actually called back on the final drive of the 4th quarter. When the Chiefs needed to be physical up front, they were. Converted a simple power G on 4th and 1 in overtime, and it wasn't always pretty for this high-flying offense, which had only scored 9 points through 3 quarters. But when you have this quarterback, you are never out of a game, and that is best symbolized by the Tyreek Hill touchdown, where Mahomes rolled to his right and fired the ball 60 plus yards through the air. For the Chargers, I know Tyrod Taylor is a great leader and game manager, always the first one in the building. I know Anthony Lynn loves him, but Justin Herbert, he makes his offense so much more capable. I mean, think of this. Tyrod has to go to the hospital shortly before kickoff with chest pains, and they tell this rookie, who didn't even have a preseason, 5 minutes before the game starts, you are starting. For that, I thought he played much better than I would have anticipated, even though the defense was probably still adjusting to more of a downfield passing threat like the rookie, since it was surprising to everybody on that field. But Herbert had them winning the game with some big-time downfield throws, and he made some key plays with his legs as well, even though he actually missed one opportunity to do so late in the third quarter as he was rolling to his left and had like 10 yards of green grass in front of him, but instead threw the ball up for grabs in the middle of the field, which led to his first career interception and maybe actually cost the Chargers the game. But he was the one who had them winning against the reigning Super Bowl champs in the first place. Overall, I came away very impressed with his performance, and I'm not sure how you can keep the 6th overall pick on the bench if Tyrod doesn't win you games and the offense looks stagnant under him. So Anthony Lynn's comments after the game, almost banging on the rookie when he had a really big game, I thought that wasn't a very smart decision by him. And one more thing I want to point out here, Harrison Butker, he's the best kicker in the league, not named Justin Tucker. He already made a 58-yarder early in the game, and then in overtime had one of the most impressive kicking performances back to back that I'd ever seen. First, he makes the 53-yarder, blown dead by a false start. So we go back 5 yards. Now from 58 yards, it's good again. Timeout, Chargers trying to freeze him. And then on that third attempt, when you think his leg might be tired, from 58 yards out, right down the middle, perfect kick. So he really put a dagger into the Chargers' hearts. And I'm actually excited for this battle of kickers with him and Justin Tucker in this upcoming Monday night game. I will put out a preview of that one tomorrow, so definitely check that out on my page, footballtalk.com. But let's move on to a final midday kickoff with the Ravens going up against the Texans. Another game where we would have liked it to be a little more competitive, but the Ravens in control the entire way pretty much. And for Baltimore's offense, Lamar Jackson's increasing efficiency from the pocket, it is scary. J.J. Watt actually got a pair of sacks on the elusive quarterback and forced him off the spot a few times, but he also had a couple of back-breaking runs for first downs, even though they kept him bottled up as a runner for the most part. But he's still so dynamic when he decides to take off, and I thought the Texans actually forced him to run the ball more than he wanted to. 16 times he carried it himself. But when you see that willingness to carve up defenses from within the pocket to go along with what he can do with his legs, that's a bad sign for opposing defenses. I talked about rookie running back J.K. Dobbins, how he could potentially take over this Baltimore backfield sooner rather than later, but he actually touched the ball only 3 times in this contest. Still, if Dobbins had 2 more yards, the Ravens would have had 4 different players with 50 plus yards rushing on the day, with Gus Edwards surprisingly leading the way in this one. And their 18 receptions on 24 attempts were spread between 9 different players, and overall the Ravens had 17 plays of 10 plus yards, despite not calling a single pass over the final 12 minutes of game action. Texans safety Justin Reed actually did show up quite a bit, and they had 4 sacks on the reigning MVP. That is something that you can hang your hat on. But overall, this Houston defense just hasn't really shown up over the first 2 weeks, and that was one of my concerns coming into the season. One of the other ones, Deshaun Watson getting banged around like crazy, happened once again this Sunday. Deshaun made some crazy plays off script to even keep the Texans relevant in this contest. But Bill O'Brien making another stupid 4th down decision in his own half, still in the first quarter, similar to that failed punt fake in the divisional round at Kansas City. That certainly doesn't help, and neither does the offensive game plan so far. Outside of one Will Fuller flip for no gain, David Johnson handled all 11 non-quarterback carries for just 34 yards. There were no easy completions to find, with Baltimore's collection of corners frustrating the opposing receivers once again. And that ball-hungry defense for the Ravens, it can really help them take over games. Marlon Humphrey, he's becoming a specialist at punching the ball out, with LJ Ford returning the forced fumble for 6 points. And Marcus Peters, he had a huge interception where he came off his man in the flats as he kept his eyes glued on the quarterback and made a beautiful catch intercepting the corner route. Baltimore's defensive pursuit and gang tackling is a beautiful thing to watch. These Ravens, they are just a machine, and like I said last week, The MVP is improving as a pocket passer, which makes him almost impossible to defend, while the defense really goes after the ball and makes timely plays to decide games. For the Texans, they did face what probably are two of the top 3 teams in the NFL so far, but things aren't easing up a whole lot with a trip to Heinz Field next Sunday, where they will face the 2-0 Steelers that should terrorize Watson even more so with the defensive front. So for Bill O'Brien, get the damn ball out of Watson's hands and not allow your quarterback to get killed. And that takes us to Sunday Night Football. What an awesome game. Another classic Patriots-Seahawks matchup, with Seattle emerging victorious out of this one. For the Seahawks offense, things actually started out in a bad way. Greg Olsen put his team in a deficit right away as the ball went off his hands directly into the ones of Devin McCourty, who went untouched into the end zone for an early 7-0 lead. But Russell Wilson, he's just in the zone right now, as he's allowed to cook as fans has demanded forever. Wilson is simply the best deep ball thrower in the game to me, and DK Metcalf is becoming a superstar right in front of our eyes. He's really showed improvement in terms of his route running, where he pushes upfield and establishes proper position to go along with how he releases off the ball. And you saw that focus with the ball in the air on the first touchdown against the league's defensive player of the year, Stephon Gilmore. DK caught 4 of 6 targets for 92 yards and the touchdown, which was actually the first one that Gilmore allowed in over 100 targets, with him as the closest defender. And I'm wondering, could this finally be Russ's year to take home the MVP trophy? On Sunday, he threw another 5 touchdowns to 5 different receivers, and I really like how Schottenheimer has called the first 2 games for Seattle, with more aggressive play calls and more creativity to it. Russ now 9 touchdowns compared to only 11 incompletions. Those are just video game type numbers. For the Patriots defense, the one guy that really stood out to me, Chase Winovich, he's becoming a problem off the edge. Had that one snap on 3rd down early in the second quarter, where Carlos Hyde was asked to pick him up one-on-one, and he just tossed the running back to the side as if he was nothing. As far as New England's offense goes, Cam Newton, he's really got his swagger back, becoming almost unstoppable as a goal line runner, until the final play obviously. Also faked that goal line run once, and then had a wide open fullback in the flats. But Cam also making some beautiful throws from the pocket, with more touch than I've ever seen him put on the ball. That was my big issues for him all the time. Never could take those MPH off the ball. One play that really stood out to Julian Edelman early in the second half. Perfect ball to create leap separation for his receiver. The only thing I don't like so far about Cam is that he leads his receivers into some big hits, and for a few of them it will lead to trips to the hospital if that continues. And he also needs to throw less of his back foot, I feel like. But Edelman put up a career high 179 receiving yards with more vertical production than I have seen from him in a while, now that Cam Newton has brought back the deep ball to a larger degree. I think that Seahawks defense is really starting to swarm once again, with Jamal Adams constantly talking and giving him some attitude. He has really changed the way they call that defense, with much more blitzing from that position than we have ever seen. And Adams now has a lot of freedom to roam around and come from all different angles, which makes him really tough to pick up. And the Seahawks are starting to change coverages late in the cadence. No play was bigger than the 3rd and long situation early in the second half, when Cam looked like he had a lane to run into the end zone, but Adams came all the way from the backside on a blitz to chop down the quarterback from behind. Ended up kicking the field goal and might have actually decided the game. Cornerback Quinton Dunbar, he jumped at the Demir Bird out route for a pick in the 3rd quarter. After he almost did so in the first half already, he could be a real playmaker from the corner position for them. But the 2 biggest issues for the Hawks defense that I see, they have no pass rush to speak of so far, and there's a lack of depth in secondary, now with the primary backup safety Marquise player out for the season as well. When I predicted this season game by game, I somehow had the Seahawks winning only 9 games, but I never really felt great about that, and I'm not a lot high on them after what I saw through the first 2 weeks, mainly because of coaching actually, as they are putting the ball into the hands of Russell Wilson on offense, and Jamal Adams making this defense so much more versatile. And now let's talk about a final game of the week. The New Orleans Saints going to Las Vegas to open up the new Alliance Stadium, and the Raiders finding a way to start things off the right way. For the Saints offense, Alvin Kamara and company, they got the edge in the run game way too easily early on. Overall, the Raiders had no answers for number 41 the entire day, and when he caught the ball short, it looked like he moved at a different speed than everybody else, seemingly killing the angle of that initial defender every single time. Traquan Smith, he was targeted on a couple deep in-breaking routes, and it looks like he will take on a lot of Michael Thomas' role as long as that guy's out. But overall, Drew Brees, he continues to be more of a factor that holds them back rather than a playmaker. I cannot even count the amounts of screens and checkdowns he once again threw to Kamara. There are just no dynamic downfield throws to test the defense, and when they face somebody who can take away that easy yardage for the back, that'll be a problem for them. Emmanuel Sanders, he didn't have a catch until that final drive with the clock running out. And Kamara's 9 catches were the same as all the New Orleans receivers had combined. For the Raiders defense, they didn't have a great showing overall, but they made one big stop in the fourth quarter when the team was up by 7 and Jalen Richard had just turned over the ball. Jonathan Abram has looked good so far after he missed pretty much all of his rookie season, really flying around the field, even though it hasn't quite resulted in any big plays so far. And not only did the defense force Breeze to check it down even more so than he actually wanted to, but they also had 6 different guys getting a hit on him, which against this offensive line is quite impressive. And on offense, Derek Carr, he was really sharp, looked to throw the ball down the field a little more, and very accurate with the football. The Saints, they could have a big problem covering the tight end position, with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and PJ Williams both being too small at just under 6 feet, and then Malcolm Jenkins, he has really lost some of that athletic ability. Demario Davis might actually be the best option in that regard, but you want to send him after the quarterback at times. And Darren Waller had a big day with just over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns on 12 catches, beating leverage with well-run routes, or just running away from his man, and picking up extra yardage despite being corralled routinely, breaking several tackles on the way. And all those catches were impactful as it helped them move the chains or put points on the board. Outside of that one sack Carr directly ran into, Malcolm Jenkins had a pretty rough night, I have to say, whether it was being exposed in coverage or getting run over by 205-pounder Jalen Richard. He might be over the hill at this point after he was a really good player for several years. And the guy who did have another strong showing is running back Josh Jacobs for the Raiders, who was coming off a 3-touchdown performance at Carolina, and once again was a problem to bring down with his elusiveness in space, spinning away from defenders, and driving the pile to finish runs. Even if the numbers didn't quite look the same as they did the week before, his fellow running back Jalen Richard could have almost had a catastrophic play after fumbling the ball as he took his eyes off it on a toss play, but the Raiders defense held strong that time, and he scored a 20-yard touchdown on that exact same play later on in the fourth. For the Saints D-line, former first-round pick Marcus Davenport, he hasn't been available these first 2 weeks, and in his absence, Trey Hendrickson has played really well actually, once driving Colton Miller straight back into Carr's face, blowing up a run play for a big tackle for loss, and stopping the back on a 3rd and long as the unblocked defender from the backside. But overall, penalties have been a major issue for New Orleans early on, as they have now been flagged for over 100 yards in both of the games so far. And I want to point out Raiders kicker Daniel Carlson. He has quietly been outstanding through his first 2 weeks, including a 54-yarder in each game, with one of them putting them up by 10 and kind of deciding this game against the Saints, and he's also been perfect on his 8 extra point attempts. But that brings us to the end of a weekly review. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to this channel, just share it with one friend today to help out. You can find all my social media linked down below, where I usually put up my weekly picks and a couple other things. I'll be back next week with another weekly report, but go to my page for Football Talk tomorrow to read up on my preview of the Chiefs-Ravens Monday night matchup. I've already labeled that one the game of the year. So until then, see you later. Peace.